Everyone hear me? On behalf of the Oregon Project Management Advisory Board, welcome to our Business Analyst Networking Group presentation of the month. My name is Connie Yeager, and I will be facilitating our meeting today. We'd like to start with a few housekeeping items. As you may have noticed, this meeting is being recorded. Please mute your phone or PC if not speaking to help reduce any background noise. If you are not speaking, you are encouraged to remain off camera. If you have any questions, raise your hand or place questions in the chat and Bryant will answer them throughout the presentation. Also, if you're interested in business analyst processes, the Business Analyst Networking Group meets the third Wednesday of every other month. For more information, visit the BANG website posted in the chat. Post that. This meeting is being recorded and linked to the meeting resources will be shared shortly after today's meeting and posted on the DAS YouTube channel. You're welcome to share with your colleagues and encouraged to spread the word on our BANG sessions. I am pleased to host this session presented by Bryant Lister, who will present on data management and governance. Bryant Lister is a seasoned IT leader with extensive experience in information technology and data management, specializing in cybersecurity, privacy, project management, and data governance. Bryant currently serves as the IT Director for the Health and Service Equity Transformation Program at the Oregon Health Authority. He is passionate about serving Oregonians, protecting their data, and utilizing data to serve improved state agency services, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In his previous role as the IT Director of the Information Security and Privacy Office, Bryant worked closely with the State Chief Information Security Officer and the Enterprise Security Office to develop and implement policies that safeguarded client information in compliance with federal and state laws. His leadership in managing information security and privacy risks has been instrumental in maintaining data integrity and accessibility. Throughout his career, Bryant has led technical teams in developing innovative solutions to complex challenges. His notable accomplishments include establishing geofencing for OHA systems, launching multiple applications, and publishing comprehensive security plans. Brian's expertise also extends to managing large-scale projects, coordinating with top-level executives, and leading cross-functional teams. His upcoming presentation will explore best practices for data management, including data governance, the importance of data privacy and security, and strategies for leveraging data to achieve organizational goals. So now, without further ado, I will go ahead, Bryant.
Oh, Bryant, you are muted.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bryant Lister. I use he, him pronouns. Welcome. Glad to be here today to share with you all a bit about leveraging data for business value. We'll cover a bunch of topics. But before we dive in, if there's any terms or concepts I use that somebody doesn't understand, please let me know. I'd hate to get through this 4-hour presentation and have people confused all the way through. That would not be good. Oh, wait, I'm being told I don't have 4 hours. Okay, I only have an hour and a half. So I'm going to have to cut the musical number, probably a few of the explosions, but we'll try and make it as exciting as possible. So most people probably find data boring, confusing, overwhelming. What they see are the numbers, the codes, the endless strings of characters. But what I see in data is the stories it can tell, the truths it can uncover, and the greater understanding it can provide. What I want to share with you today is how we make that journey from a jumble of data to meaning and value for ourselves and our organization. As business analysts, one of your challenges is to liaison between different parts of an organization. Many times that is between business programs and IT, and the language they share is data. So however they come at it from different perspectives, different points of view, but understanding some of these fundamental data concepts can really be helpful in doing business analysis work with them and bridging some of the gaps. And are the slides advancing? Don't think so. There we go. Okay. So to accomplish that goal, we're going to talk about data, what it is, why it is. I'm going to introduce some concepts around data management, data governance. Then we're going to discuss the goal, which is delivering value to your organization and serving its mission. Finally, we're going to bring this all together and talk about how you get past all the boring data stuff and instead use it to tell stories. But we're going to do this by building a diagram that's going to show the flow from reality to meaning, from data to wisdom. We're going to use this to illustrate why the processes involved are so important. We'll put them into context of data management and data governance and show why those are important in this conversion of data to wisdom. We'll be moving from left to right in this diagram, beginning with reality, which is usually a good place to start. Reality is what has actually occurred. But individuals and even computer systems are limited in the data they can gather about any point in time or occurrence about that reality. So the reality is limited by perception, the data we can collect, and the biases we expose it to that then creates truth as we perceive it or as the computer system perceives it. Then we put that truth through examination, thinking about how it relates to similar incidents, past experiences, other knowledge we possess, and use all of that to create meaning. This is where, as a business analyst, you would probably be asking, what's the overall purpose or goal? Bringing together the functions and processes into requirements, and then determining how those requirements fit the purpose, and using that knowledge to understand how that data will serve that goal. So I want you to take a look at this picture. And what do you see? Obviously, I think most of you are muted, so you can't yell it back at me. But it's probably a somewhat confusing picture if this is the first time you've seen this picture. And it's limited by our perception of it. Now we're going to do something to this picture to try and hopefully make it a little clearer. We're going to flip it just 90 degrees. So the image on the left and right are the same. The image on the right is just rotated that 90 degrees. And that shift in the image should change your perception, hopefully. Because human beings, like most of you, have an inherent bias. Some of it's innate, some of it's biological. But the bias we're seeing here is called pareidolia. And that is our recognition of faces. Because we as human beings are used to seeing horizontal eyes. Most of us eyes are right here and they're horizontal. Every time we see two eye-like objects in the horizontal plane, a face starts to form. But when it's in the vertical, it creates a bit of a confusion. It creates a little bit of a bias for us. And so when we see multiple eye-like objects, we want to establish the eyes as the two that are in the or horizontal plane, not in the vertical. That's why this image confuses people many times when they first see it until it's rotated that 90 degrees. Now we have other biases built on our experiences and our expectations. This occurs not just with visual images, but also with data and information. And because our computer programs and systems are built by humans, they inherently have biases. They've gotten them from us. Even our AI systems have gotten biases because they're built on what humans have experienced, what humans have known. And so two people and two systems can look at data, the same data, and interpret it differently. And that's an important thing to understand is that data is subject to our biases. Data is subject to our interpretations, and this is true for computer systems as well. We have algorithms, analysis processes that those systems use, and it will transform the data in different ways. And we have to be cognizant of that. So make sure you understand your own biases and preconceptions and those of your business partners, those that you're working with to build a set of requirements for a project so that you can perceive how those biases might affect the project, might affect the interpretation of data in those projects so that you can be cognizant of that, prepare for that, and hopefully either overcome that bias or put in the safeguards to make sure that that bias is recognized and we can translate what's happened to the data through the process. So before we can create value from data, we first need to talk about data and how it's created, how it's transformed. Well, it's easy to describe data as facts, figures, statistics, measures, or observations. The simplest description of data, as I mentioned before, is that is a view, a snapshot into some aspect of reality. We're putting a lens on reality and we're capturing data, and we capture some part of that reality in that data. And so that's the simplest definition I can give you for data. And as we look at data, make sure you understand that view that you're using to gather, collect, measure, and produce it in terms of what reality it represents, because that's a very specific context you'll want to capture. So when we look at the forms we fill out, like to get health insurance or to open a bank account, when we look at the actions we do, like purchases on an e-commerce site or a store using their Savers card, measures that occur on your phone, like how many steps you've taken or how many hours you've spent looking at the screen. None of us wants to know that. Or the data produced from our computer systems, like log files or network traffic. This is all data. But when you look at the data alone, if you were to take all those examples and just look at the data alone without the context, it would lack significant meaning. It would be hard to understand. So really making sure you capture that context under which the data is collected is really important because the credibility of the data is dependent on being able to document where it came from, how it was collected, who collected it, and what's been done with it since it was collected. That's all going to affect that integrity of that data and be a restriction on what can be done with that data. So make sure that's all part of those requirements that you're looking at as a business analyst around data is making sure to capture what context it's collected under and what context it's stored under and used under. So here's what many people think about when they hear the word data. Most of this has little to no meaning because it really lacks context. We can make some guesses as to what might be shown here. I can see some coding in there and interpret a bit of it, but it's just data. And without knowing the full context of it, I'm not sure what to do with it. And as a developer and analyst, I've been involved in many projects where I was requested to recreate paper form or a existing form application into a web application. So it was take this form, take these fields of inputs and put them into a web application so that somebody can enter this data. The request rarely started with, we've got a bunch of data and we want to do something with it. It's usually, we've got this form and we need it so that people can access it through the web. But I'd really say that, as a business analyst, one of your opportunities is to push back on that a little bit. And don't just start with the business process of collecting information or having a form on the web, but start with the data. Move into the direction by asking questions about the request that really gets into the data, that identifies what that data is, why it's being collected, how it's being collected, because that really can have an impact on what we're perceiving there in the data. There's a lot of opportunities lost when we simply recreate what already exists, because I guarantee what already exists has been around for a while and things around it have changed. And so it's an opportunity to really re-examine what's going on around that data, both in its collection and then eventually in its use and the value it produces. So it's better to move back to those building blocks, to the data, and start from there and build a business process from there up, rather than taking the business process and making the data conform to it. Identifying where this data comes from, who else might be collecting that same data in your organization, and then work with the business process to look for how it fits into their larger organization and how the data is part of that bigger ecosystem. Because that really is going to be critical in understanding how to work with that data, understanding all the subject matter experts in the data, and all the places that data might go. Because data rarely stays in one place. It's used in large organizations by many different partners. And it's very important that that data be fit for purpose throughout the organization, not just for one area. So I do want to talk about a couple of very specific terms related to data. These are ones you might have come across already or will come across if you've dealt with data in any aspect. Not all data is created equal. You'll come across data stored in many different formats in many different ways, and understanding a little bit about how these structures are named and why will really assist you in being effective in using data. So the first term, structured data. Kind of obvious. It's data that's organized in a very specific manner. Typically, it's in rows and columns. You've seen spreadsheets, databases, tables, and records where everything's all lined up, and it's very clear that this data in this row or this table or this column corresponds to this. And that structure gives context. You know what the title of the column tells you what everything underneath it should be about. And so it gives you that context just by having that structured data. Unfortunately, that's a small amount of our data in our organizations. The largest segment of data in our organizations, about 90% of it, is unstructured. It's data that doesn't have predefined formats. It's data that can be spread out all over the place in multiple ways, usually in some type of either text or image, like emails, social media posts, videos, Word documents, PDFs, PowerPoints like this, that really don't have a lot of structure to them, and pulling the data out from them is a much more complex process. But like I said, it's about 90% of the data in an organization. The other concept, and it's a term that some are moving away from, is big data. It's basically extremely large and complex data sets that usually require some advanced tools and techniques to process and analyze just because it's so large. You may not know it, but tools like Excel and some of these other data spreadsheet tools have limits. They can only go to so many columns and so many rows, and then they're done. They're not going any further. Where big data goes 10, 100,000 times further than that in terms of the size that they can handle. And so they do require different tools to process them and look at them. You'll see these in web traffic logs, sensor data for very complex structures, transactional data from a large e-commerce site. Amazon.com, I'm sure, has big data and lots of it. So you want to be cognizant of that term, but don't worry about it too much, because all data is essentially becoming big data. You'd be really surprised the amount of data that your phone is collecting on you every day. So we're going to go back to our diagram here, and we're going to go to that next piece. So data, after adding context, collection, curation, which is that maintenance of the data in a storage structure, then it becomes information, something that can be interpreted on its own. Just like a string of letters may have no meaning until they are put in the proper order, formed into words, and have the appropriate punctuation, do they become a sentence that you can actually read and understand. So data requires that processing to yield information. The perception of reality becomes truth, which makes it subjective. And the steps taken to convert data to information and information to knowledge can have a significant impact on the message that's delivered. The lens we choose to view data, the lens we choose to view reality, can frame the image, can have a significant impact on what truth we are perceiving. So that context, that framing, that things that we talked about previously, those questions about how it was collected, where and when, et cetera, that is all called metadata. And metadata is simply data about data. It provides the context for how it was collected, who collected it, why it might have been collected. But without that metadata, it's very difficult to convert that data to information. Common examples of metadata would be if you had a book, the author, publication date, number of pages in it, the title. It's all metadata about that book. It doesn't tell you everything that's in the book. It just gives you some context around that book. If you have a digital file, the date modified, the file size, that acronym that occurs after the period telling you the type of file. That's all metadata about that file. It doesn't tell you a lot about what's in it, but it gives you some context for it. The taxonomy for animals, the genus for a dog is Canis. That's metadata about a dog. If you've used a digital camera, you might have seen an image similar to the one on the right. That camera is providing a lot of metadata, a lot of details about that image. If while taking the picture, you change those things, you change the f-stop, you change the shutter speed, the ISO. I don't know how many of you actually worked cameras that had film before, but those things had a meaning before. Now they're a little bit less meaningful with digital cameras, but they still have retained some of the terminology that we were stuck with from the past. So, but if you change that, if you change those numbers, all of a sudden that image of those flowers would change. The flowers don't change. The reality didn't change. But the data that camera captured, because you've changed the metadata about it, the context under which the data was captured, the context under which that reality was perceived, the flowers would look different. And so that's an important thing to note as you're working with data is how you collect it, when you collect it, where you collect it, can really affect the information that's pulled from it. So here is some data that's organized, analyzed, processed into usable information. We have a graph where we've taken two or more related elements and displayed them visually. We have a smartphone that's displaying a step count. It's taken a lot of different data from your phone, from accelerometers and other timing features within the phone and built that into a step count. On the right, we've got a healthcare record, which is taken, measures and stats and images, all to provide this view of a patient's health. These interfaces are designed to provide the appropriate level of information. Some of them are simple, some of them more complex, but they're designed in a way so that that information can be utilized depending on its fit for purpose and depending on the user who's going to be viewing it. So how you assemble that information and display it has a real impact on what you can pull from that information and what you get from that data. So now we're going to build that next phase of this diagram. We're getting into the reason for collecting data in the first place, which is to gain knowledge and eventually find the meaning that comes from this, the meaning that comes from the next bit, which is going to be wisdom. This will usually require experts and expertise and knowledge and experience in dealing with similar data and information and applying educated judgment and insight into it. And this is where the people who really get excited about data actually see the payoff, the acquisition of new knowledge, and then its use in solving problems. So here we have some individuals reviewing information and knowledge, and they'll use those to make decisions. A doctor reviewing a patient record to determine what's the appropriate level of care for this individual. How are we going to address whatever issues they have? We have a logistics expert planning a delivery route or shipping strategies based on the information they have, based on the knowledge that's provided, whatever they're seeing on that screen. And we have an individual, assessing their workout and physical status based on step counts, heart rates, and other biometrics to determine where they should go from here. What decisions should they make now based on their workout routines and based on their health? And this is where experience, insight, and judgment complete that transformation of data to wisdom, providing meaning for all that data gathering. There's an old movie. I remember it when I was very young, and I'm going to quote from it. It's a 1978 Superman movie. Some people can read War and Peace and come away thinking it's a simple adventure stories. Others can read the ingredients on a chewing gum wrapper and unlock the secrets of the universe. Those subject matter experts see something different in that data and information and knowledge because it's been formed in a way that they can utilize it through their expertise to gain wisdom. That examination and application of knowledge, using it to make a decision, plan a strategy, or perform a task, gives data its meaning and value. And that value is what you should start out understanding when looking at any project around data gathering or data utilization. What's that meaning that we hope to get from it? So now we've completed the diagram. And I purposefully, in this diagram, use funnels and cones for the processing of data information. And I do that because a lot of data goes into only a small amount of knowledge and wisdom being produced. There is a reason why the term data mining exists, because that process of finding knowledge and wisdom in large sets of data is a lot like mining. You have to go through a lot of dirt to find the precious materials you seek. The information and knowledge is created through various business rules, algorithms, and processes of that data, and then that's put into displays and reports for people to utilize. The key thing to remember, though, is there's no rule or algorithm that should be an absolute. Make sure you're future-proofing whatever you're working on. Make sure you're understanding that today is not tomorrow. Every law, rule, or regulation you apply today without the ability to change or modify it shackles the future to the ignorance of the present. The world is constantly changing, and we should not let what we know today limit what we know tomorrow. So let's talk a little bit about wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to make sound judgments and decisions based on knowledge, experience, and deep understanding. It goes beyond simply knowing facts or possessing intelligence. Wisdom involves the practical application of knowledge in positive ways. And it's interesting to note that in many cultures, wisdom is symbolically represented by an owl. This is true for ancient Greece, Native American cultures, Hinduism, Celtic cultures, Chinese, Japanese, African, Mesoamerican. All of these cultures viewed the owl as a symbol of wisdom. Some have theorized that this perception of wisdom in owls is due to their large eyes. They perceive everything around them, so they're using that to collect a lot of data. And they're relatively silent compared to other birds. Yes, you hear the hoots and that, but compared to most other birds, they are relatively quiet. And it makes them seem a bit stoic, as if they're doing a lot of processing, a lot of thinking. And this goes back to that diagram and that funneling of a lot of data through processes that do analysis, pattern recognition, modeling to generate a small amount of wisdom. So I don't think it's any weird coincidence that all these cultures view owls as a symbol of wisdom. They're designed in a way that makes us reflect on our own ability to use data to create information, knowledge, and wisdom. So how do we convert all of this data, information, knowledge, and wisdom? And how do we coordinate all of that processing? Well, the key is good data management, a strategy, a plan, and active processes managing data, that's fundamental to getting value from that data. So the collection, the storage, the organization, the maintenance of it is all critically important to be able to use data effectively. As business analysts, it's important to consider the data management practices of your organization. Understanding those can be really helpful in working through how you're going to be part of a project that manages data and that utilizes data. These should be represented as non-functional requirements in your documentation, alongside security requirements and accessibility practices for your organization. Those data management practices should be there. They should be recognized in those requirements, because without them, it's going to be very difficult for a data project to go through the processes necessary to produce the wisdom, to produce the goals for the organization. So there's a lot of different functions within data management, and I've called out a few here. Data collection is obviously the first step. That gathering of data from forms, from different inputs, from different systems, from other organizations even. That collection is extremely important, and it's important to make sure that we're understanding the context around the collection. We've talked a lot about that already. Data storage is another very important aspect here. Where we store the data, how we store the data is incredibly important for doing it safely and effectively. And we need to be working a lot on decisions around how data is stored, understanding its use today and its use in the future, because how you store it could limit you in the future on how you can use it. Data integration is another very important part of managing the data. You're going to be bringing in data from many different sources. If you're in a large organization, that can get a little overwhelming because you're combining this data from different program areas, maybe even from different organizations and different sources there. And you want to be doing that so you can create a unified view from the data. So that organization and processing of data in the integration is incredibly important. Sometimes it's even really important the order in which you do it. So understanding data integration and how that fits into a data project is really important and should be part of looking at the requirements there for any data project. Data quality, probably the most important thing. If you're gathering data and there's no quality, it's probably not worth gathering, because that quality ensures that the data is accurate, that it's complete, that's reliable. If you don't have those things, it makes the data almost unusable, or it makes it so the data is producing misinformation because it's not all there. You're not getting a complete picture of what you need to in order to utilize that data effectively. Data security, obviously, if you're in an organization that collects data on people, if you're in an organization that collects regulated data, financial data, health data, etc., it's very important that we follow the regulations, laws, policies on protecting that data. So security, very important. Making sure that unauthorized users do not have access to this data, making sure that it's not breached, making sure that there's not systems or people that are affecting the integrity of this data. Just allowing people to access the data in a way that they shouldn't, they might go in and unintentionally edit the data, change it in a way that affects the integrity of that data. So that security is a multi-level practice you're going to be very concerned about. And of course, data accessibility. If data isn't accessible, it's as good as it not being there. Authorized users need to be able to get to that data, because they need to be able to take that data and turn it into information, turn it into knowledge, and then utilize that to create wisdom. So all that analysis, processing is dependent on the data being accessible. So those with experience and the expertise can utilize it to produce value from it. Understanding how all of this occurs in your organization, understanding the rules around it, the process around it, is really going to help you. You want to stay aligned to those standard practices. And it's important when you're developing your requirements that involve any data handling or data processing, that you know how your organization does these things, that you know where the experts are for data management and be able to go to them for their non-functional requirements around data storage, around data handling, quality, security, accessibility, because you want to be following those in your organization and don't want to set up anything that's outside of the standard practices for your organization, because then it can really affect what you can do with the data. It can affect that integration of the data. So you'll want to stay closely aligned with what the rest of your organization and your ecosystem is doing. So one of the bigger players in data management is the Data Management Association International, DAMA, and they've created this data management wheel. There's 11 domains here of data management, and they should be tailored to fit your use case in your organization. And you rely on those subject matter experts I talked about in data management to help tailor that, to help determine what parts of this and what levels of this you'll need for whatever project you're working on. Now, I could spend hours talking about each of these separate domains. I won't. I could do them in all separate presentations because there's a lot to back up these. There's a lot of expertise underlying each of these data domains, but I won't go into all of that. I don't want to go into too deep a dive here because I want to make it relevant for you. But look to those experts in data management in your organization and around you because they'll be able to help you and help guide a tailoring of these to your use case. But the purpose of showing you this is to focus on the central aspect that brings all of this together. And that's that central circle, data governance. You can't effectively do data management without data governance. It's a critical part of all of this. It brings all of these things together. Simply, data governance is policies, processes, and standards for how data should be handled to preserve its integrity, accuracy, quality, and compliance. However, it's much more than just the documentation and the standardization there. It's heavily reliant on collaboration, communication, the people within your organization. They need to be talking, they need to be part of these processes in order to do effective data governance. Every organization has a responsibility to maintain, protect, and use its data conforming to whatever regulation, laws, and values oversee that organization. And so data governance is responsible for keeping your organization's data aligned to those. And since data governance is part of data management, these policies, processes, and standards should be understood when developing any requirements around data. You'll probably be looking at who in your organization is doing data governance and how the data that you're working on for whatever project you're involved with fits into that. Is it part of this part of your organization or over here? Where's the utilization of it? Where are other data that it needs to integrate with? Because that will all need to be considered when looking at data governance throughout your organization and how whatever project or piece of data you're working with fits into that. So understanding data governance and the need for it, um, we need to be able to control the access to data. Not everyone should have access to all data. There's security, privacy, and other responsibilities around data that have specific rules and regulations that we have to follow. And data governance helps dictate that. So when somebody needs access to data, whether they need access in a one-time or a longer term access that'll be continuous through an API or other integration principles, there needs to be a data governance process to determine if that's the correct way that they should be getting access to that data and if they should actually have access to the data for whatever they're going to use it for. So looking into who should be allowed to access the data, what they should be allowed to do with the data. Is it fit for that purpose? Can it be applied in the right context? We need to have experts meet together and discuss that and understand the context of under which the data was collected, stored, and whatever's been done to it since to be able to say, yes, it's fit for that purpose. It can be applied in that way. And data governance is part of that process. Who sets those standards? Who says what data should be collected, where it should be collected, how it should be used? Well, hopefully that's part of the data governance process, is experts getting together and determining what standards they'll all follow. Just setting something as simple as how long should a last name be when you're collecting information on a person? What special characters should be allowed? By having the same rules throughout your organization, you can match John Smith to John Smith, even if they're in different programs, because you're going to set some standards around what defines a person within your data, and that's part of that data governance. But organizations, regulations, business processes, these change over time. And how do we adjust the data to keep up with that? If a regulation changes, if a business process changes, we need data governance to be in there working together to understand how those changes will affect the data that we already have, the data that we'll bring into the system in the future, and be able to do the proper integrations there and changes to the data so that it either is still usable and doesn't become stale and doesn't lose its integrity, and we can maintain the quality of it. So these questions are going to require subject matter experts, data owners, and others to participate in those conversations. And these engagements are critically important part of data governance. The standards, policies, processes that are set up to provide guidance in answering these questions, in protecting the data, and ensuring that it's fit for purpose and intended use, those are usually set up by a data governance committee. And they'll be getting together to develop those standards, to develop those policies and processes. So you'll want to make sure that data governance is part of your consideration when working on any project, when working on anything that involves data and data utilization, because that is going to be a critical aspect to make sure that you're getting value from your data. There are some key principles in data governance to keep in mind. First one is accountability. You want to have people who are clearly responsible for the quality of the data, the maintenance of the data, the security of the data, and that accountability is critical to maintaining those things with the data. It's not enough to just leave them to some system. You've got to have people there. Transparency of the data is important as you start transforming it and to understand what that knowledge is that you've created. If you take different sets of data and do different things to them, you can get different truths out of them, just as that perception of reality changes the truth you get from it. You can do the same with data. So you need to be transparent in what's been done to the data when it's gathered, that context around its collection, and then as it's transformed into information and knowledge. Those things need to be transparent. Those analysis, those algorithms, processes, et cetera, that transform the data, that take it from one thing to another, those need to be visible. People need to be able to see those so they understand what they're getting on the other end, understand how it was made from the data that was collected. Auditability, uh, being able to trace and review what's happened, being able to know where the data is at, what's being done with it, who's used it and for what, who's accessed it and why. That's all very important for many of those same things around security and transparency and being able to keep it fit for purpose and being accountable for its use. And then stewardship. Data stewards, those people who oversee all of your data assets. And they'll do it individually in different programs, and some might be more globally throughout your organization. But that stewardship is incredibly important. People who are responsible for maintaining the data, for understanding the data, for being those subject matter experts that'll be involved in data governance. When we look at data governance, it's often represented as a set of pillars, something holding up a strong building. These are usually four foundation elements that go into data governance. Many times there are these key principles that are presented. Sometimes there are other names put on them based on the different data governance framework, but they usually involve some aspect of these four elements. They're that critically important to data governance. And you'll come across a lot of different frameworks for data governance that will have different ways of doing stewardship, different ways of putting together policies and quality management, different security standards and ways of doing compliance. But those things are all important. As long as you have a framework that addresses those, you'll be in good shape. But these 5 areas should definitely be considered when documenting requirements for any data project. Don't leave data governance and data management chance. Don't just say, oh, they're there somewhere. Make sure they are part of the requirements and part of project management so that you get the subject matter experts into those requirement gathering sessions, get their knowledge, get their information built into those requirements so that the data has value later on. If you don't have those things, if it's not done in a way that follows good standards, policies, and practices, it will decrease the value of the data. It will decrease the usability of that data throughout the organization. And that can have a detrimental effect on what you're trying to accomplish there. So, yeah, creating knowledge and wisdom, well, it's a worthy goal into itself. When you're in an organization, when you're in a business, they'll want their knowledge and wisdom to deliver value. And you'll need to determine what that organization values. And of course, that's going to require more data. So you're going to have to be requiring or gathering data about your organization and what matters to it, where it sees value. That's going to help you determine where you can get value out of this data. So you need to understand the mission, the vision, the values of your organizations. You need to find out what questions are being asked of your organization. So if you're in a governmental organization, your legislators, the press, even the community will be asking certain questions of your organization. Knowing what those are can help you understand where you can get value from your data because it can answer some of those questions. How does the organization define success? Those are going to be those metrics, KPIs, OKRs, other things that really tell you where success is in the organization. And that data can help define that and help provide substantive evidence of it being successful. Who receives any reporting from your organization? All of that should be based on data it's gathered, collected, curated, and turned into information and knowledge. That should all come from uh, that report or should all be represented in those reports. What are the top strategic goals for your organization? That'll tell you a lot about what it values, and it'll tell you a lot about what data it needs in order to meet those goals. Where do we need to focus process improvement efforts at? Those are going to be areas where you'll want to look for, are we collecting data on those processes? In order to approve a process, you've got to measure it. And so you've got to collect data on how that process is going throughout its life cycle and throughout its um, flow chart or whatever you've got for that process in order to understand whether you're actually meeting its goals and needs. What are the biggest risks facing the organization? How are those, dealt with? What are the mitigation strategies? How are those measured? How do we know that those risks are occurring or decreasing? Um, that's all things that data can do. Now, this could be an ever expanding list of questions, and they really do drive business value. But think about your organization. Focus on its priorities, its objectives, and you'll probably come up with even more questions to add to this list. Hopefully, you'll have data owners, stewards in the business, and other experts that can help answer these questions because they're experts in the data and the programs that they work in. Unfortunately, some of the data management concepts, though, are still new to state organizations and even other private organizations. And they can be early on in their adoption and implementation plans of them. So look for what you can, but don't be too disappointed when you find that there's still a lot of gaps in how we do data management, both in the state and in some private organizations. But there are resources outside of that you can go to, like DAMA and the Data Management Book of Knowledge that has a great deal of information about data management if you want to ever learn a lot about it. There's a lot of different sources of that. So through that data management, through data governance, the data is gathered and transformed, solve problems, to provide meaning. And it's important that that data is collected with purpose, context, and that's all captured in that metadata. You want to take that information, assemble it through governed processes, and make it accessible so that the subject matter experts can take that knowledge and convert it to wisdom, so that they can apply their experience, their insight and judgment, and turn that into wisdom, get meaning from it. But that knowledge has to be validated, maintained, and most importantly, it needs to be used to address the questions that will yield the most valuable answers for your organization. And the processes involved in data management and data governance provide a solid framework to guide those processes, to protect that data, and ensure the reality under which the data was collected is not lost in that conversion, that examination from truth to meaning. So here's a really great quote that I really love from Albert Einstein. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper questions to ask. Luckily, we usually aren't put in the position too often in the state or in your jobs where your life depends on asking the right questions in the next hour. At least I hope not. Um, but it's worthwhile to develop a series of data questions, some of which we've talked about in this presentation, and have those on hand to be able to utilize that when working on these projects. But each situation is different, and each new project you work on will have its own set of questions to ask. It's key to keep asking questions, probe deeper, discover more. Just like it takes a lot of data to form a small amount of knowledge, it can take a lot of questions to get the best answer that will yield greater understanding and wisdom. We can go through a lot of data and get very little from it. But if we ask the right questions, we collect data in a way that keeps its value through that process, we can generate greater understanding, more wisdom, and more value for your organization. Now, one final note. As you're dealing with data, remember that it does represent reality. And when that data is about people, it's about real people, real lives, and their data deserves the same respect they do. So when you think about those data management principles, especially quality, purity, integrity, make sure you're giving it the proper respect that the people that that data represents deserves. In addition, especially in our data, representation matters. Data can tell the story about a community. But if some members are left out, if their data isn't represented, you're not getting the real story. You're not getting the whole truth. And you're doing a disservice to those members of the community that are left out. So as you go through projects involving data, speak up when you see data not representing the whole picture that it should, and keep asking questions. Keep digging deeper to make sure that we're mining that data, that we're collecting the right amount of data from the right people in the right context to be able to provide real value, especially if you're working in state organizations. We're here to serve the people of Oregon. And we don't want to gather too little data or too much data where we're not providing greater knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and value for them through the work we do. Thank you for your time. Hopefully I haven't taken too much of it. Um, Glad you all stuck around. If you have any questions, please ask them.
We do have a question. Could you please show slide 4 again?
Hopefully people don't get dizzy as I buzz back through these. Oh, there we, oh yes, the doggy picture.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Bryant.
Everyone awake?
Let me share my screen again here. Oh, here's a question. How could you use these concepts in data migration?
So in a data migration project, you want to make sure that you're not migrating just raw data and you're not losing the context, the value, the richness under which it was collected. You're not making assumptions about the data because you're lacking that metadata, that context of that data. So in data migration, it's very important that we're not just getting one little piece of it or one segment of it, but we're understanding the whole picture of that data so that we can then utilize that and produce more value from it. If you're doing a data migration and you're only taking bits and pieces and you're losing the richness around it, you're not getting a clear picture. And it can really affect what knowledge and wisdom is generated from it when it's combined with other data and utilize that in the future. And there's a
Um,
whole segment in data management framework that talks about data migration.
the other question is, will the presentation be available after this presentation? Yes, it will be sent out to you. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you, Bryant.
If anybody does come up with any questions, you wake up at 2 a.m. this morning and you have a question about it because this has really stuck with you through the night, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd be happy to answer them.
Lauren, did you have a question?
No, I didn't. Sorry,
Okay.
finger trouble. Thank
Okay.
you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you all.
So let me share my screen. Yeah, there we go. Trying to share here. Our next presentation will be on October 15th, and our presenter will be Winnie Evans Boas, and she's going to be talking about developing a service. And it will be virtual via Teams, and I'm trying to show the slide with the Bang webpage, but if you have any further questions, you can go to the Bang webpage at www.oregon.gov.das HR pages at bangs.aps, or the Bang email is ba.network@oregon.gov. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you again on October 15th.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Bryant. Bye.